Welcome to the Tepper School of Business Multimedia Series. For more information on the Tepper School at Carnegie Mellon, please visit us at www.tepper.cmu.edu/multimedia. And now, here's your selected video.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, just a reminder to silence all devices and open any food packages that might cause noise during the Speaker Series event. So today, our guest is Per G.H. Lofberg, and he is a 1973 MSIA alum. He spent 15 years with the Boston Consulting Group in New York, Boston, and West Germany. He also co-founded and served as chairman as CEO, for Merck Capital Ventures, and also as chairman for Merck Medco Managed Care. He's currently executive vice president of CVS Health Operations, or CVS Health Corporation, sorry. So please give a warm welcome to Mr. Lofberg.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. It's been amazing to see how the campus has evolved and how the university has changed in the last 40 years. And it's fun to be back again. So thanks for inviting me. So I came to Carnegie Mellon in 1971. And actually it was an interesting year for a foreign young graduate student to come to the United States. The Vietnam War was actually raging at the time. Richard Nixon was the president of the United States, but the Watergate burglary hadn't yet happened. That came shortly after that. Do you remember who won the World Series that year? You old-timers, but yeah. The Pittsburgh Pirates won the World Series. And if you were here, you'll remember that it was an amazing time. The city was actually completely out of control. It was wonderful. There was sort of a combination of riots and carnival for a couple of days after that event. And I'd never seen anything like it. And Pittsburgh at the time was actually a steel town with big steel mills lining the rivers. They're pretty much all gone right now. I actually drove by one coming down here in Hazelwood. Hazelwood, right? There's still kind of the remnants of a steel mill, but other than that, they are pretty much gone. And the economy was pretty bad. We were just coming out of a recession. But I have to say that coming here to Pittsburgh and joining the graduate program here at GSIA, as it was then called, was really kind of a profound and quite sort of transformative opportunity for me, both personally and professionally. My plan at the time was to actually come to the United States, get an MBA degree, and then move back to Europe and work in some multinational corporation. But that obviously didn't happen. That was 40 years ago. I'm still here. And I can really thank CMU, Carnegie Mellon, for giving me that opportunity. Many times people have asked me, how do you get from Sweden to Pittsburgh? What made me end up here? And candidly, it wasn't a very sort of rational or professional or careful, deliberate process. We had very little information to go on back in Europe in those days to really kind of understand, what the different schools had to offer. Learn about sort of the different nuances. You could probably count on one or two hands all of the Swedes who had ever been to America to an MBA program at that time. I managed to find two, and I had some good chats with them. One was actually a professor at my university who had been a PhD student here at Carnegie Mellon. But we really didn't have much to go on. So we ordered catalogs from the different universities. I probably ordered a dozen catalogs. And they had some pretty pictures of the school and had listings of courses and that sort of thing. But that was about it. So you didn't have a whole lot to go on. One thing stood out though in the in the Carnegie Mellon brochure or Carnegie Mellon catalog, it had an aerial photograph of the campus. And I thought, it looked great. I mean, it was very beautiful with lots of open space and trees. Very different from kind of a European university that I was familiar with, which was typically just some downtown city blocks and not much else. But what really stood out to me was that in this aerial photograph of the campus, there was a golf course right next to the campus. And, how cool was that? I mean, I was a golf addict at the time. So, I can't say that was the reason I came here, but it certainly had an impact on me. Well, you all know what I was looking at. It was Shenley Park. And from in the aerial shot, it looked like it was a golf course. And maybe it was at once upon a time, but certainly when I got here, it had probably been abandoned, several decades ago. Ironically, I later learned that Stanford University actually has a championship golf course right next to its campus, but it wasn't in the catalog, so there you go. So we began to kind of dig into the catalogs, and we talked to the people that we met and so on. We really began to appreciate some of the nuances that really kind of stood out in terms of the different business schools here in the United States. And I have to say, Carnegie Mellon University and GSIA at the time really represented one end of the spectrum of the different choices that we had to kind of look at that time. And there were really two kind of different philosophies that was being expressed by the different business schools. And some of you who are closer to me in age, you will remember this. It's either the quantitative analytical approach or the case study approach, where you studied cases. And Carnegie Mellon and maybe MIT represent sort of one end of the spectrum, Harvard Business School kind of the other end of the spectrum. And kind of the buzz at the time was that, well, here at Carnegie Mellon, you actually learn tools and techniques that you could apply immediately in your first job after you graduated. While at Harvard, maybe you were trained to one day become a CEO of a company, but you didn't learn much in terms of what to do when you got your first job out of school. That was probably a little unfair, but that was certainly kind of the buzz at the time. And today, I suspect things have gotten much more sort of blended, where there's more of a sort of a hybrid between these different approaches. So the quantitative approach was really one of the distinguishing features here at Carnegie Mellon, and certainly something that really kind of attracted. And what it really meant was that they wanted to kind of teach you sort of analytical research methods that were known in academia, but that then you could apply to data decision making. And I would say that was a novel kind of approach, a novel concept at the time. And it included, statistical analysis, multivariate regression, linear programming, simulation, various financial modeling, that sort of thing. And the theory was that if you could really master those techniques and apply them in your job, you could also, interpret the results and understand the strengths and limitations of those techniques, when they were presented to you. I would say, at least from my perspective, the curriculum here was very hard. I mean, it was really, really hard work. And you really needed pretty advanced math to keep up with the, with the curriculum, far more advanced than what I had coming out of undergraduate school in Sweden. So I had to really, bust my you-know-what to try to keep up with this. And I was lucky to have a French aerospace engineer who was tremendous at math, and he could, when I was struggling with the, with the methodologies. And there were a couple of other really distinctive approaches here at Carnegie Mellon that I just want to mention to kind of give you of what what was sort of interesting about the school at the time. the school here was really kind of in the forefront of teaching computer science as a tool for business analysis and operation. And the school kind of offered resources and access that far surpassed what any other university, made available to the students. And that was kind of a factor from my perspective. I mean, to you today, some of this may seem quaint. You all have your smart. Each of those devices have computing capacity that far the whole university at the time. But at the time, this was revolutionary and really kind of a unique feature here. So basically, the way it worked was that in the computer science building, there was a big hall. And they had about 100 or so teletype terminals there. You probably don't even know what teletype terminals are. You can find them in the Smithsonian, but they're like an old-fashioned typewriter which spews out a lot of paper. And those terminals were hooked up to a big IBM mainframe in the basement. So you basically built your program in the computer center, programming Fortran, and then you submitted it to the computer, and you had to wait for the results. So typically, you went out for pizza, and then you came back a little later, a couple hours later, to pick up your results. Well, you either got paper, just a single sheet of paper back, which meant that you had made some kind of programming error, and you had to go back and start over again, or you get a thick stack of paper like this, and bingo, then you were in business, the program had run successfully, and you could get on with your work. So, I thought that was pretty amazing, and the computer was closely linked to a lot of the analytical techniques and so on that we were being taught in the classroom. Another interesting feature here at the school is that the size was very small compared to the other American business schools. I think my class was probably around 70 students. There was one female student, major problem from a bunch of perspectives. And there were maybe a dozen or so foreign students, all European at that time. But the environment was tremendous. It was very intimate, very friendly, both among the students, where we all became friends, and between the students and the faculty. And the closeness and the friendliness of the faculty was actually huge for me. Very different from the environment I had experienced, where when you went to class, you had to wear a suit and tie. And when the professor entered the room, you had to stand up in attention. And very different than, this day and age. Regret that. And, the chance of having sort of a one-on-one to sit down with them and talk to them, that was, very, very remote. The only conversation I can remember having had one-on-one with, one of my professors in college was when they reviewed my senior thesis. And the professor said, "Lofberg, your work is a mixture of wine and water, but we need a little bit more wine." So I want to mention one other distinctive feature of the program at the time, and that was the management game. You probably have that as elective now, but that was a required second-year course here. And I would say, this university was way ahead or pretty kind of alone in terms of offering that kind of program. So the way it worked was that the class was divided up into teams representing competing companies in the same business. And each member of the team had a certain function: production, finance, marketing, that sort of thing. And every week to kind of decide on your strategy. And you did that to the computer, and the computer churned for a while and kind of gave you back the results in terms of market share, in terms of revenues, in terms of profits, and that sort of thing. And the academic work was focused both on the kind of analytics involved, but also on the kind of the teamwork in the management team that you had formed. So it was pretty interesting from that standpoint. In my group, The president of the company that we had formed was an Englishman by the name of George Weldon, still a good friend after what happened, which I'm going to tell you about. So one Monday morning, and we had a party the weekend before, and we met as a management team. George Weldon announced that the young woman he had met at the party during the weekend was off limits for the rest of the management team. And we only had one woman in our class, so we had to kind of import women when we had parties from the other undergraduate schools or from town. And I thought the young lady that George had spent the time with that party was very nice and very pretty. So I wasn't ready to accept his restriction. Well, 2 years later, the young lady in question, she accepted my marriage proposal. And we just celebrated our 40th anniversary last year. So there you go. So the big question, true for all of you, and it was 40 years ago, is what do you do after business school? Where do you go to work? And it's April now, so if you're second-year students, you probably are pretty far down the path of figuring that out. If you're first-year students, you still have a little time, but eventually you will have to think about it too. And I think for all of you, it's a pretty rich environment today. I mean, you probably have lots of from many different career paths, whether it's consulting or banking or startups or big companies to choose from. And the system for MBA has become far more sophisticated than it was in my days. We had a very rough time finding work, and nobody wanted to hire a foreign student. So my original goal of going to work for a multinational like Ford or IBM or GE, General Foods or something like that, we were typically, when we contacted them, we were typically told, well, when you've graduated and gone back to Sweden, you can call our local office in Sweden and see what they have. Well, that wasn't exactly what I was looking for response. So it was certainly a lot of work with very little yield in terms of contacting all these companies. In the end, I was lucky, and I ended up in consulting with the Boston Consulting. And they hired me in their Boston office with a view to move to Europe after a year, where I spoke some of the languages, and they were trying to expand in that part of the world. There was a student before me, whose name was Francois de Carbonel, who had joined BCG the year before I did, and he kind of helped me get an interview there, and that's how it happened. I think Francois ended up being a trustee of the university at some point, or some kind of advisory board or something like that. Wonderful guy. And I suspect, some of you are considering consulting. How many of you are thinking about going into consulting? Oh, it's a good number. It's certainly not the only thing to do, but I think it's a very good option when you come out of business school. You can sort of think of it as a paid postgraduate, graduate education that opens up a lot of opportunities down the road. And I've had the benefit of working with literally hundreds of MBAs over the years who have chosen that path and gone on to do really, really interesting work, later on in their careers. And I stayed with BCG for 15 years, which is actually far longer than most people who go from business school into the consulting profession before I ventured into the world. And joining BCG was sort of the second transformative opportunity for me after coming to Carnegie, here in Pittsburgh. So in 1973, when I joined BCG, the firm grew from 50 consultants in total to 100 consultants. So they basically doubled in size that year. Now I think the firm has about 10,000 consultants with about 50 offices or so around the world. And BCG actually was a very unusual organization at the time and has probably retained some of those traits today. But many aspects of their approach in the early days, they just wouldn't cut it in today's business environment. The founder of BCG was a fellow by the name of Bruce Henderson, and he actually had his career here in Pittsburgh before he started BCG. But he had some very distinctive and unusual leadership philosophies. He believed in sort of the survival of the fittest. He was a Darwinist. So teaching, coaching, mentoring, that sort of thing, that wasn't his cup of tea. When you joined the firm, you assigned the desk and the secretary, nobody knew what to do, where to go to work. You basically had to find your own work from the case managers that had projects going on or that were prospecting for new projects. So we ended most of the day reading the Wall Street Journal from front to back several times. And then, a couple of times a day, we would sweep around the office to talk to everybody and see what was going on. Well, ironically, my first assignment was right back here in Pittsburgh, working on a steel mill expansion for Jones & Laughlin Steel, which is a whole story in and of itself that we can save for another time. But every week at BCG, they posted a sheet where all the consultants were ranked from top to bottom in terms of the number of hours that they had billed to clients the previous week. And if you were at the, high on the list, your billing rate or your price went up, as did your pay, and obviously it wasn't so good to be at the lower part of the list. But the case managers, they then had sort of a choice to choose between expensive, experienced consultants or less expensive rookies or less talented people. It was a pretty brutal but actually very effective system. And Bruce Henderson, he did believe that diversity and competition is what drives innovation and performance. And he managed to pull together an amazing sort of group of people from all over the world, all walks of life, into an amazing melting pot of talent. And I was very fortunate to be part of that. At one point in the Boston office in the 1970s, I had colleagues like Mitt Romney and Bibi Netanyahu at the same time, along with many, many other people, maybe less famous than those two, but who were very talented and who ended up doing really kind of interesting things later on in life, and many of whom are still very close friends to this day. But there's no question that Bruce's philosophy of putting together this kind of group into a Darwinian performance-based culture, it was to some extent the germ of BCG's success during the decades that followed. So I can't really say enough about my experience at BCG. It actually fitted very well with the quantitative approach here at Carnegie Mellon, and it has in many ways shaped my whole kind of philosophy and approach to business, up to this day. And it was at BCG that I ended up working in healthcare, which really became the rest of my career. And the upshot of that was that in the late 70s, in this country, we started kind of an evolution or a revolution that you can call the managed care revolution. It was really transitioning the healthcare system from a fee-for-service-based reimbursement system to types of or payment methods that were designed to create a more cost-effective or more effective healthcare system. And at BCG, there was a group of us who believed that, if you were in healthcare, whether you were a hospital or an insurance company or a manufacturer, that fundamental change in the sort of the economics of healthcare really kind of was going to force pretty much everyone to rethink their strategy with new approaches to their business and become much, much more focused on cost competitiveness and competing for market share and that sort of and what people had to do under the traditional fee-for-service reimbursement system. So we decided to build a consulting practice around that whole concept, and it actually worked very, very well. Today, I believe that the healthcare practice in BCG is the single biggest practice area in the United States. It probably represents something like 30% of all the work that the firm does in the United States. But I think this transition from fee-for-service to kind of other types of reimbursement or managed care practices, which actually continues to this day and is far from complete. It's really kind of at the core of the healthcare debate in this country, especially as it relates to trying to figure out between access to care, quality of care, and affordability of care. So you see, that sort of tension playing out kind of around these different reimbursement models and the debate around them. I happen to believe that that particular tension is actually very good. I think it generates and it breeds innovation and competition. And it's no coincidence, I think, that pretty much all innovation, or 90% of it in healthcare, happens in this country and not in any of the other countries that have different kinds of healthcare systems, especially kind of socialized healthcare systems. So, healthcare represents today a growing multi-trillion-dollar part of our economy. With this kind of change continuing, I just think there is a tremendous amount of work to do here, and a lot of interesting things still to explore. If I was 40 years younger, I would be thrilled to continue down that path. I ended up focusing particularly on the pharmaceutical and the pharmacy part of healthcare. And this area emerged basically beginning in the 1980s as a relatively small part of the healthcare sector, representing maybe 2 to 3%, to today probably like 10 to 15% of healthcare cost. And the growth that was really driven by large blockbuster drugs that came to the market in the 80s and 90s to treat blood pressure, cholesterol, depression, that sort of thing. That growth really made pharmaceuticals and pharmacy spend a very high priority issue for the payers. The payers being either employers or insurance companies or even government programs. And that kind of growth really gave rise to the industry that I spent the better part of my career working in, the so-called PBM business. How many of you know what a PBM is? 2. Basically, it stands for Pharmacy Benefit Management. And it's a business that not many people know about, but everyone in the room, I can guarantee you, is affected by it. So this industry basically became a middleman, really trying to control healthcare costs, or specifically prescription drug costs, as they expanded, and to create mechanisms and control tools for payers to basically make sure that the dollars they spent on pharmaceuticals were well spent and that they were as sort of cost effective as possible. And it started as a very fragmented business, maybe 30 or 40 or so companies around the country that did various little pieces of it. But over the years, it's consolidated tremendously. So today, there are 2 big companies. It's CVS Health, the company, and a company called Express Scripts that bought Medco, which was my previous company. And those 2 companies today are probably approaching $100 billion revenues, and they're easily in the top 50 of companies in the United States, from a sort of a size standpoint. So what does the PBM do? What's sort of our value proposition, if you will? Basically, distill it down into maybe 4 different things. Number 1, we make sure that generic drugs are used as much as possible. So we create various kind of programs and incentives for people to use generics. instead of branded drugs when that's appropriate. And generic drugs tend to be about 90% cheaper than their branded equivalents. We promote mail order pharmacy, which is basically you getting 90 days of prescriptions through the mail, as opposed to 30-day prescriptions at the local pharmacy, and with a higher copay. We create so-called preferred drug lists or formularies, which enable us to negotiate discounts from pharmaceutical manufacturers in return for access or preference on, in our programs. And finally, we use data and analytics to kind of target and analyze prescription drug usage patterns, where we can then reach out to patients or physicians to try to correct suboptimal usage of prescriptions, either cheaper drugs or making sure people stay on their medications, that sort of thing. So that's really kind of what PBMs do, and it's really become a very important part of the healthcare sector. But it's not been without controversy. Lots of litigation, lots of legislative over the years. It's been sort of a disruptive business. Not many people like this kind of change because it's their traditional way of doing business. Drug companies don't like generics. Retail pharmacists don't like mail order. Physicians don't like to be called and told what to prescribe, nor do they like to call us to get permission to prescribe a drug. So there's a tremendous amount of controversy around these innovations that really are designed to control the use of prescription drugs in these healthcare plans. The other thing that's happened to our industry that to sort of summarize is as people kind of have tried to respond to pressures in this industry, they have looked to change the business model by basically vertically integrating, by basically buying their customers, if you will. So instead of having to give a discount to a customer, you buy them so you can keep the money yourself. That's sort of the theory. So the drug companies at one point tried to buy all of the major PBMs. The insurance companies, United Healthcare is now trying to buy a company called Catamaran, which is a smaller company. And CVS, of course, bought Caremark, which was another sort of competitor in our field. So one sort of effort to try to deal with these pressures is to vertically integrate. But that isn't always an easy thing to do. And I say vertical integration is probably a challenging proposition in almost any business, because you do end up sort of competing with your customers or with your suppliers. And sometimes the missions between these two entities are quite different. If you're an insurance company, you want to save money on healthcare. If you're a hospital, you want to fill your beds that you have in your hospital. If you're a drug company, you want to sell branded drugs. You don't want to sell generics. PBMs want to sell generics, that sort of thing. So many times these missions can run into conflict with each other when the companies are combined. And you see this actually playing out right here in your backyard in Pittsburgh with the battle between Highmark and UPMC. I think a lot of that started because Highmark didn't want to pay UPMC what UPMC wanted, so UPMC decided to form their own insurance company to compete with Highmark. Highmark decided, okay, I'm going to go out and buy my own hospital, so I don't need UPMC, and there you go. So it's sort of a challenging proposition, and many of these vertical integrations over the years end up not delivering on the promise and sort of unraveling down the road. We'll see what happens here in Pittsburgh. It's probably too early to make any predictions at this point. So to wrap up, the only thing I can say here is that the pressures and changes in healthcare that I've ended up focusing on and working in, they are by no means settling down. In fact, I would say they're accelerating. And it's going to create an extremely dynamic, interesting environment in coming years. And it really has to do with the fact that in the country we want to expand coverage of healthcare to everyone. In a prosperous country like this, it doesn't make sense that millions of people don't have access to adequate healthcare. And at the same time, you have innovation in new medical treatment opportunities. You have aging of the population. And somehow or other, you have to try to make that equation be affordable, and we have to be able to pay for it. So there's a lot to do here, lots of opportunity, I think, to add value. And I really hope that some of you will be part of this future, that you'll have a chance to work in this world, and also that you'll have opportunities and luck, just like I had, to make a difference. And I do think that Carnegie Mellon here at the Tepper School is a great place to start. So good luck to all of you, and thank you for having me. If you have questions, I'll be more than happy to take questions.
We have a microphone on that end and on this end, so if you just raise your hand, we'll bring a microphone to you.
Hi, my name is Kara Bartlett. Thank you for being here. I'm going to be interning this summer at Johnson & Johnson in their consumer healthcare. And I was curious how a company like yours, or CVS in general, would manage its relationship with a company like J&J, where they're providing those name brand type of things where you all are putting competitors directly next to them on the shelf. It sounds very tricky, so I'm just curious your perspective on that.
Well, there are several pieces to it. And, luckily, I think Johnson & Johnson is a very large company, as is CVS. So there is room for both. But clearly, what CVS is trying to do in what we call the front store is to take as much of the shelf as they can and have private label products. And I think originally that was very controversial with the brand name companies, but today they've come to realize that that's the way the world works, and they are instead trying to innovate, to come up with new and different products, to distribute through companies like us. I happen to think J&J is a great company. They have a big relationship with us, even though we compete with them in the front store. But we also represent their pharmaceuticals to all of our PBM customers. So they're certainly a very important strategic partner for us.
Other questions?
All the way up in the corner there.
I was wondering how PBMs offer a significant competitive advantage in the healthcare industry today, because as I recall, I think Walgreens Boot Alliance, they divested Catamaran in 2011, and they don't have a significant PBM in their business. So I just want to know how that's a significant advantage.
Yeah, so there are pieces of that equation. A certain amount of it has to do with scale. So basically what ended up happening was that the transaction processing of prescription claims, which is basically the claim when you go to the pharmacy and you get a prescription. The pharmacy sends a claim to the insurance company and gets reimbursed from the insurance company. That kind of transaction became increasingly different than the processing of medical claims, where you have much bigger dollar amounts, much more manual process. So the PBMs basically developed technologies that really were a copy of credit card transactions that became very and where scale became extremely powerful. So CVS Caremark probably represents 70 million lives in this country. That's probably 5 times greater than any insurance company. And likewise, Express Scripts is about the same size. It became impossible for the insurance companies to kind of maintain the IT technology dedicated to prescription drug claims processing, and it really became a specialized PBMs. The other part of it that's playing out right now is that when you buy drugs, there's a difference between buying generic drugs versus buying branded drugs. When you buy generic drugs, scale is really all that matters. So the more drugs you can purchase on a negotiated basis, the better your price is. And generics today represent 80% of all prescriptions filled. And so the PBMs, with their scale, have been able to negotiate much, much more successfully than the mid-sized or smaller insurance companies have been able to do for generic drugs. And that's been a major sort of value driver in the industry.
Hi, my name is Yajar. Thank you so much for being here. I had a question about the consulting industry. I'll be heading to consulting shortly after I graduate.
Where are you going?
PwC. I was wondering, from your 15 years of experience, what would be some advice you'd give to somebody entering the consulting field, and something that you wish you had known when you were starting that you would want us to know?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, I feel extremely good about that career path. So there are lots of good things. I think you get to see a variety of business situations, and sooner or later you are going to end up working with organizations that like you so much that they're going to want you to come. That's a very predictable path. So most people benefit from that. On the flip side, it's very hard work, a lot of travel. So, if I look back at, my life, I think there were years when my family suffered. They didn't see me as much as they should. And I was on the road, pretty much nonstop. So if you can wait and have family, that sort of thing, that's good. Because it is stressful on your family, for sure.
Hi, my name is Prashant Ambe. One of the things that we learned in our classes is great organizations have a great culture. So I was wondering what the culture at CVS is like.
Well, I think there are sort of two dimensions to that. One is, I would say, the business mission, if you will. What we're focused on as an organization, and the other, how the company works internally. And I would say, and as you probably have seen, CVS over the years and they're determined to try to migrate from being sort of a traditional company to become much more of a healthcare company. They acquired Caremark back in 2008, something like that. They have the mini clinics. There are about 1,000 mini clinics around the country where you can get, very inexpensive and accessible primary care 7 days a week. They recently acquired a company called Cohen, which does home infusion for people who are, getting intravenous infusions in their home. So they're really trying to become a healthcare company, and that's kind of the vision that we have. And when we are together as a leadership team, that's what we talk about, and that's one part of it. I would say the organization works that I happen to like a lot is that it's basically a very much sort of a non-political teamwork organization. Everyone works together. There's really no kind of merit in trying to be a solo hero. You build together teams, the teams work together, and you try to succeed as a group as opposed to as individual performer. And that's a very nice culture. I think it's a very open debate in the company. So we don't have kind of a process where the bosses sort of direct everything that happens, but instead the free and open discussion where everyone be aired. Eventually, you have to make a decision and move forward. But there's certainly a great sense of internal, sort of discussion and debate that hopefully ends up being helpful in terms of the final decisions that we end up making.
Hello, my name is Megan ORourke. Thank you for being here. It sounds like you developed your specialty in healthcare pretty early on. And we get advice here to not only develop and nurture a depth, but also breadth across different industries. How did you manage that balance throughout your career?
Well, certainly when I started at Boston Consulting Group, you were basically pretty much told not to specialize and to really kind of try many different things. And BCG in those days was very much about sort of corporate strategy as opposed to industry expertise. And what ended up happening to me is that we ended up working in healthcare really, by serendipity. And then we saw all of these trends that we kind of realized was going to change the whole system. And so, we sort of broke the mold a little bit purposely and said, okay, let's create a core group of people that, really builds up expertise and know-how in the kind of the arcane aspects of the healthcare system. And other people actually did similar things at the same time in banking, which was also becoming a very complicated, highly regulated business. And then some people did it actually in production strategy, when the whole world was trying to figure out how do Japanese companies work so much more efficiently than industry stuff. So we had a couple of groups like that sort of formed informally because people became interested in it, and then over time that led to a more sort of a formalized structure with different practice groups, really dedicated to different parts of the economy. But I enjoyed tremendously that early stage when we were just completely generalists or strategists.
Hi, Adam Townsend. Thanks for coming. So my question is specifically for PBMs kind of 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So when you look at your supply-based generic manufacturers, and you look what's going on in that industry, a lot of consolidation gives them a little more power. And then from specifically the insurers, your guys' customers, a lot of consolidation in that space gives them more power. So what are you guys doing to address that?
Well, one of the things that's been sort of interesting about the PBM business is that it has never really been constant. So the way the PBMs add value and the way we also make money has changed over the years. And at one point it was mail order, then it became generics, and now it's rebates. And the new frontier today is specialty meds, which are very expensive biotech drugs that require a lot of different approaches. So the business keeps evolving the whole time. It's a little hard to predict, where it's going to go, but we certainly are trying to move the company forward in a couple of key areas. One has to do with really trying to expand the role pharmacists play in primary care. So, if you think of the traditional view of pharmacist is a person behind the counter who basically puts pills in a vial and then sells them to you. We're trying to basically evolve that into a more clinically involved role where the primary role for pharmacists is to really deal with the patients, deal with the patient information, and help them deal with their medication requirements. So a more proactive clinical role for the pharmacist. That's one big area for us. And there are a couple of other big areas that we're also focused on. We're very much involved in trying to transform the business to be more digitally enabled than it has been. So many of the traditional practices in pharmacy and health insurance, we're kind of trying to move those forward to be sort of state of the art in terms of what people and what your generation are going to expect in terms of digital applications and that sort of thing. So the business continues to evolve, and how that's going to play out is sort of the bet for the future. We're investing a lot of effort and people and money in moving the business in these directions, and time will tell how it will play out. But it's certainly not going to be static.
Any final last quick question?
Hi, I'm Randy Cohen. Not long ago, CVS made the decision to stop selling cigarettes because it was against the healthcare mission. What I wanted to ask you was, how does ethics play in the strategic decision-making process, either at CVS or in your own career?
Well, I think there is sort of if you work in healthcare, you're not going to be able to succeed in healthcare if all you focus on is the bottom line. You really have to have a higher goal than that, a higher mission. And at Merck, they make a big deal out of that. George Merck, who was kind of the founder of the company as we know it today, he said something like, if you're working in the area of medicine, the goal is not profits. The goal is about the patients. And the more you think about patients, the more profits are likely to follow. So, and that became sort of a guiding light, if you will. So I think if really whatever sector you work on in healthcare, you can't succeed if you don't have a goal to do something that's really good for people, and to put that at the top of the priority list, and then hopefully the other things will follow. Well, thank you all. It's great to be here.